So yes, welcome to everybody. And if you are attending for the first time, and especially hearty welcome to you. I will take a moment to introduce myself. Some of you might not know who I am. My name is James Sturdy. I'm a therapist. I am a registered counselor with Health Professions Council. I have been practicing since 2010. So this is my 60th year of practice. I am in private practice in Morningside in Durban. I have been since about 2016. And I am also part of the Regent Business School Counseling Services, which is why we are meeting today. And I've also been part of Regent since, about 10 years now. I think this is my 10th year. So I've been with Regent for a long time. I've seen it grow substantially. And I do a lot of the student counseling there and staff counseling. And I do training webinars as well on topics such as the one we are going to discuss today. So I'm just putting my email address in the chat as well. It's counseling@regent.ac.za. So Regent does, of course, provide counseling confidentially and free of charge for all registered students. So if this is something that you are interested in, it doesn't have to be necessarily linked to academics. But if you're experiencing any type of stress in your life, we believe, which I believe is the right thing to the right way to look at it, we don't kind of silo ourselves off when we are studying or working. These are all parts of our lives that are interconnected. So our personal lives very much affect the way we show up in academic spaces and professional spaces. So it would be very counterproductive to say, well, I'm struggling perhaps to apply myself academically, but the personal stuff is off limits, rather to say we're whole people who often bring all of ourselves to these different areas of our lives. And if we're not well or stressed or dealing with something in our personal lives, that's all certainly going to have some type of effect on our academic lives. What we hope is that people take advantage of this type of opportunity with webinars such as this, but also individual counseling, just to make sure that they're as well as they can be. That's going to make you the most successful student you can be as well, and that obviously is a big part of our shared interest there. Yes, so the type of things I do, you might have noticed in my biography there, I started practicing in 2010, only went into private, and 6 years later, in 2016. So for those initial 6 years of my professional life, I have been working, I was working in a number of hospitals in and around Durban. I did group therapy there, designed group therapy programs, facilitated them as well, just for patients who were suffering from anxiety or depression or trauma. And I did that for the first 6 years, and then moved on to private practice. And really, my practice is focused on dealing with everyday people who are dealing with everyday life stuff. So the difficult stuff, the kind of normal stuff, grief and trauma and relationship difficulties, stress, and then some depression and anxiety as well. These are kind of really normal human experiences. And my practice is focused on helping people with that. And that kind of translates into these webinars we have been running for many years now, and we will continue to run this year as well, where I share certain ideas just to do with wellness, human wellness and flourishing, and also developing some of the skills we can have perhaps with dealing with the challenges we face in our lives. So that is my background very briefly. I will do my best to keep an eye on the chat as I take you through some of the slides that I have here today. But as you will probably notice, there are a lot of people in this webinar, so I'm not going to be able to see everything, but I will do my best. And if I see a relevant comment, I will pause on it. So feel free to keep the chat going. It's not a distraction to me at all. And there will be time at the end as well for some questions and any comments that you have as well. So I'll try and make it as interactive as we can with this type of online forum. Okay, good. So those of you who are just joining, a very warm welcome to you. Let's get started. The focus of today's webinar is technology, essentially. There's so much to say about technology. I think there's a lot that has been said about it already, but the focus is going to be on balance. How do we find intentionality in the way that we interact with our devices? And that's going to be the focus of this. So how do we acknowledge that we are human beings in the 26th, 27th year of the 21st century, which means technology is very much part of our lives. love it or hate it, it's very hard to escape it. And just the fact that all of us are here together, over 200 of us in one online space shows how we are utilizing this technology and shows how it can really be a force for good. But of course, well documented that technology can also be destabilizing, and it can cause imbalance in our lives and poor mental health. And these things, I think we can by now. Everyone has these the possibilities, but we don't necessarily know always exactly what to do with that conflict, right? Which is these good things and helpful technologies and life changing. And when we start speaking about AI as well, the really kind of transformative technologies, having a phone itself is a transformative technology. I think we've kind of become so accustomed to that that perhaps we don't realize the magic that's actually in it. So much of my practice is run off my phone, to be honest. 10 years ago, I would have had to have a full-time receptionist. These days, I don't. I can do all sorts of scheduling and booking and that off my phone, not to mention all of the other report writing and everything that comes through AI. There's just so much benefits that come from technology. So if you think about it that way, and you think about your own phone, just a note on that. We're going to, there's a few interchangeable ideas we're going to speak about today. So basically, you can think about technology generally speaking. That's everything, right? Laptops and mobile phones, tablets, and TVs. The list goes on. Just basically technology at the moment. That's the kind of broad category. But then, of course, we have our phones themselves. That's a specific type of that technology. And then we have social media, which is neither of those things, but often is an application that comes through technology that we have on our phone. These are all slightly different things, and often I'll be speaking about them slightly interchangeably. Just to understand at different times, I might be meaning slightly different things. So specifically speaking about your mobile device that probably most of you have within arm's reach right now. And my guess would be if it was not within arm's reach, you would probably experience some type of anxiety. That's a kind of normal relationship that we have with these devices these days, and that kind of says quite a lot to us, which we'll get into as we go through this session. But what would the answer to that question be? Feel free to pop it in the chat. So, is your phone a net positive or negative for you? If you kind of weigh out all of the benefits that your phone gives you, and you kind of contrast that with the downside that it might have, how does it weigh out? Is it a force of good, or maybe does it take more than it gives? What's your sense on that personally? It's not an easy question to answer. Yeah, perhaps as the cards start to come in, you can see maybe a bit of both. But for some of you, maybe tending a little bit more negative. Yeah, both. So yeah, as I see the comments coming in, I think people are saying, well, definitely they're good things, also negative. It's hard to kind of weigh it out and to see which is outweighing the other. And I think where this points us is to say, how do we then mindfully kind of curate a relationship with this device, with these technologies? So yeah, it's a tool. Someone said that, a shot passed on the chat. It's a very great point. It's a tool, but it's easy down rabbit holes. Not just easy, but kind of that the whole point, I think, for them to take us down rabbit holes. Yeah. So again, I think it's easy. It's important just to acknowledge that when we are speaking about curating a healthy relationship with the technologies in our life, we have to acknowledge that they're not all bad. We have to kind of see the benefits that are there as well. And then we can hopefully allow ourselves to access the benefits whilst protecting ourselves perhaps for some of the downsides that might be there. Okay, so I don't know if you've done this before, just to have a look at your digital wellness. You can open it up on your phone. I'll do it now with you if you want. iOS is on the left side of the deck there. Android is on the right. This will give you a sense. My battery's quite low. I need to do this quickly and plug it in again. But if you follow the instructions there, it'll give you a sense for what your phone use looks like. It might be instructed to do it right now. So you open it up there, you'll start to get a little bit of data that your phone will give you about your use. So if I look at my phone today, it tells me that I have spent an hour on it. 25 minutes has been on WhatsApp Business, 16 minutes has been on YouTube, and 7 minutes has been on Facebook. That's me being very vulnerable about my social media use there. So that you might think, is that time well spent or not? you'll be able to get a bit of a sense for yours. You might be surprised by something you see there. But often what can be really helpful as you start to reevaluate how you use technology is just to get a sense of actually what does your use look like then? What does your use look like on a typical day? And you can get a weekly report as well. And that'll show you how often you're using it on a weekly time. That's fine over there. 3 hours and 37 minutes. It seems like an incredible amount of time. That's that I'm using my phone on a daily basis. Yeah, and then it kind of will break down how often you're on the different apps there. And mine kind of WhatsApp is the prevalent one, and then different social medias as well. And then it'll tell you, if you're using it whilst driving or walking, that type of information as well. So that'll give you a bit of a sense of what your use looks like. Yeah. Okay. Just seeing some of your responses there. Some of you are a little bit surprised by it. So Gary, down 20%, that's that's a substantial amount. Good. So I think that's just an important foundation to start off with, to say, what does our phone use actually look like? And honestly, most people look at their phone use and they echo the response that I just had, which is that is not great. I don't know if that's actually how I would like it to be if I was intentionally kind of designing the way that I use my device. And again, there's good reasons for that, which we'll get into. Okay. So just a few things we're going to discuss as we go through this. We're just going to speak a little bit about the history of these devices, how we got here, the psychological toll that these devices can take on us, the mechanisms behind it. We'll speak a little bit about some ways of going about digital detoxing, and then there will be a little bit of time for questions at the end. And then, yeah, I'm just looking at some of the numbers coming in as well. So anything from, I think I saw 23 minutes up to 7 hours, 11. Look, I don't know if you would necessarily categorize it as good or bad. I think we have to have a nuanced take on this. So I think Jordan's point is 4 hours on YouTube. That would be a lot if you're watching cat videos or, culture war stuff. But the fact that you're listening to podcasts and videos, well, that's a slightly different thing, right? And often we're using phones and devices to do work as well. I do that myself. So it really depends, that's why it helps to have a bit more of a high granular analysis of it to say, what is the use? Not only what am I on, but what am I doing when I'm on my phone? Yeah, okay, so that's the layout that we're going to draw on the work of two people who are quite instrumental and influential in this space. If you're interested in some of the ideas that I'm speaking about today, you can look them up. So it's Jonathan Haidt and then also Tristan Harris. We'll kind of cover a bit of their work. You probably come across them at various points as well. And if you haven't, they are really well worth checking out. Okay, so the history is something like this. Everything changed around the time that the iPhone was launched. This was the beginning of the smartphone era. So before then, we had cell phones. I was born in '86, and that makes me 40. So probably my first cell phone was probably about 1998, 1997, I'm guessing, like Nokia 3310. And that had basically, you could send SMSs, you could design your own ringtones, and you could play Snake and all of it and make calls, I guess. So really limited. It was quite hard to lose hours on that type of device. When the smartphone came, it changed everything because all of a sudden these were very sophisticated devices, touch screens, and everything starts to snowball from there. It goes to the next level when social media starts to become available on your phone. So there was social media before 2010, and slightly before the smartphone, but you had to go onto an actual laptop or a desktop computer and access it, which made it a bit of a barrier, but a friction there. It wasn't as easy to become addicted to it. As soon as it's on your phone, then you start to have a completely different way of accessing it. And then notifications as well. Push notifications come a little bit later after those social media on your app starts to become developed. I think it was the BlackBerry that started having push notifications, and that was something that really changed the way we interact with these things as well. Yeah, I could be on your right. BlackBerry was before the smartphone, and BlackBerry really kind of laid the groundwork for a lot of the more intrusive, algorithmic when not algorithmic, but the intrusive mechanisms that smartphones later started to use. So what we find from 2012 onwards is this then starts to become the first generation to fully grow up with being online. I started going online late 90s. If you were born from 2012 onwards, you didn't know a world where people weren't online all the time. And if probably for a lot of people in this webinar as well, you might not, you wouldn't have necessarily been born then. That would make you 14 today or 13, 14, but you might find that you came of age around that time. So even if you 20 now, that would mean you were 6, by the time you started to, become conscious of what's around you, the whole world is online. And everywhere we look, we see devices. So by 2050, most teens own smartphones, amazingly. Children these days, depending where you are in the world, but many children are getting their first phone around the age of 9 or 11. It's a smartphone. And then the average adult is checking their phone about 96 times a day. So that's once every 10 minutes or so. Whether you want to or not, it's like a different limb that you have. You kind of often feel powerless not to actually pick it up and look where the notifications are. And they've become better and better with that. It used to be sometimes there was no way of knowing, then it became a flashing light. Now you've got an always on display. So you can look at your phone just across the room. If you ever were brave enough to put your phone that far away from you, and you would see there's a notification. And it's very hard once you see that notification to then resist it. And that's the way that these phones and devices are designed. So we moved from what Jonathan Haidt called a play-based childhood to a phone-based childhood. You can see the two ideas there, left and right. So play-based, obviously, children are out in the world, they are getting dirty, they're hurting themselves, they're kind of taking risks and learning social interactions. Phone-based, it all starts to transition indoors. People, devices, and parents increasingly start to use devices as a babysitting technique as well. Which is a very understandable thing to do, especially for parents who are kind of overloaded, and single parents as well, parents who are really struggling with the load that's on them. The phones then start to become babysitters, and children then transition from going out and playing to being more inside. And there's lots of consequences to this developmentally, because for the complete history of our history as human beings, we've obviously been out there. We've been in natural spaces, learning to interact with the world out there through our senses. And then this very recently started to shift. And this has changed the way that we develop. So, the play-based childhood tends to give a little bit more autonomy to children. Children at varying stages have parents kind of being a bit more helicopter parenting or not. But ultimately, you'll speak to people who were raised 30, 40, 50, 80 years ago, and they will say, well, we would go out on the streets, and then we were told to come home, and the street lights came on. That type of thing happens a lot these days. There was more exploration, real life risk taking, whereas with the phone-based childhood, you're seeing more screen time, social comparison, and isolation as well. And this, of course, has consequences, right? Because if you take the way that we have always historically kind of evolved to develop, and you significantly disrupt that, we expect the way that we develop as to show some type of changes as well. And some of them are going to be positive, but some of them are naturally going to be helpful as well. So what we find is that screen time starts to replace really essential developmental experiences, which is things like face-to-face communication, right? Boredom, which is such an important part of creativity. And boredom is also a really important aspect in terms of stress management, because creativity is actually a really important thing when it comes to managing stress, problem solving. If we can't think creatively, then we tend to not be able to kind of think outside of the box of problems we're facing, and often then we become overwhelmed by the stress that we're facing. And boredom is kind of like, I was thinking about this the other day, it's kind of like, in this day and age. And like before, maybe even 50 years ago, those were pretty normal experiences for people. As people might feel hungry a lot of the time, and they might feel bored a lot of the time. And those aren't necessarily bad things. In 2026, we don't often, and obviously it varies, and, the poverty is still very much a thing. And we have to acknowledge everyone's experiences are not the same, but in many different spaces, just with the availability of constant food, even if it's low quality food, hunger is not really a feeling that a lot of people have to feel unless they want to. So if you're hungry often, not always, um, if you're hungry often, people are choosing to be hungry because they, if they wanted to, they can get an apple from the fridge, or they can go to the supermarket. It's just completely full of things. That wasn't the case 100 years ago. Definitely wasn't the case 1,000 years ago. Definitely wasn't the case 50,000 years ago. Hunger was just a normal part of our lives. And it's the same with boredom. You actually don't have to be bored these days unless you choose to be, because there's so many things that you could choose just to hijack your attention. And so boredom, which is this kind of unpleasant thing, but actually quite a necessary thing, has essentially been as much as possible. We kind of try to take it out of our lives, and that's had consequences as well, because it often just means we're in this constant state of distraction and constant state of not being present, absence almost from our lives, and then we lose the positive effects that can come from boredom as well, which is things like creativity and being able to try different things and experience life in different ways. And then the final one is learning to tolerate discomfort and failure. Is often in the more traditional play-based childhood, you kind of have to experience these things. Whereas if you're raising your life a bit more online, you don't have to tolerate that discomfort and failure to the same degree. But there are a whole lot of other negative experiences, social experiences, that often start to come over time. So the psychological toll that then comes with these devices, the common one, which I'm sure most of you have across at some point, is that we are constantly living online. We're constantly in a state of comparison and evaluation and judgment. We kind of learn to we become slaves to this. You post a picture and you wait for the likes, or you kind of put something online and you wait for the positive feedback. And when it comes, it's validating, and when it doesn't, it can be really rejecting. And then we kind of fall into these really unrealistic ideals of how people's lives look and how they physically look, and also comparison. And these comparisons often lead to feelings of inadequacy, inferiority. Everyone seems to be living their best lives on Instagram. I seem to not be. My life seems to be really kind of dull, and I'm kind of missing out on so much. This is especially the case with teenage girls. Instagram use is really, really destructive for adolescent teenagers. Adolescent girls. That this is what the research kind of goes over and over again. Self-harm is really increased in that cohort, as has other suicidal ideation, suicidal behavior. These are really kind of destructive forces that start to play out. Sleep disruptions. So sleep has kind of over time become the third holy grail of wellness. We've got diet and exercise, and sleep is increasingly being seen as something that is so important for just our physical health, but our mental health as well. Everything that we kind of should care about when it comes to mental health, which is mood, emotional regulation, positive feelings, attention, concentration, memory, focus. All of these are kind of linked to good sleep, and poor sleep. We start to see a decrease, and the same with stress management. As we tend to manage stress better when we're getting good sleep, and we tend to manage stress worse when we're getting low sleep, and because we're more stressed, we then sleep worse as well. And technology, of course, can be really detrimental here. I spoke about the different categories of technology earlier. Phones, technology, phones, devices, gaming is a part of it as well, right? I won't go into a lot of detail in this webinar, but this is something that's really disruptive for sleep, can be disruptive for social development as well, these face-to-face social development as well. But the kind of unnatural light that comes from our phone often gets our brain into an awake state as well, which makes it harder to then fall asleep. It's kind of interfering with these really ancient circadian rhythms of, when the sun's up, you're awake, and when the sun's down, you're asleep. And that can start to become really disruptive as well. And then scrolling becomes a bedtime ritual. We're very ritualistic as human beings. We like habits. We kind of very easily fall into patterns. and scrolling can be something we do before bed. Imagine if I was to do a quick poll in this room, there would be very few people of the 294 of us, I guess, that put their phone down maybe 2 hours before they go to bed and start to kind of incorporate good sleep hygiene. And I will be one of those people. I'm normally on my phone at least half an hour before I go to sleep. I tend to read a book as much as I can before I go to sleep. But I can only really get 20 minutes into these days. So that gives me a little bit of protection from that sleep disruptors. The normal things, by the way. We're all kind of struggling with the same things here. Yes, doom scrolling indeed, Gordon. So yeah, sleep deprivation is linked to mood swings, anxiety, and poor emotional regulation, of course. Yeah, if you can follow Len's advice on this, to have your cell phone at 8 p.m. every day, depending when you with you. I think it might have dipped out there, but that would be good. Yeah, FOMO. Someone mentioned FOMO just now in the chat. I think it was. It kind of flew by it. Yeah, FOMO is a big part of social media use as well. It's constant highlight reels, the perception that everyone's doing so well, everyone's happier and more successful and better looking than us. This leads to the perpetual sense of inadequacy. And then also a really big consequence of this ubiquitous constant technology use is that over time our attention spans are just getting shorter and shorter. This is the same reason I said, I kind of struggle to read for more than like 20 minutes at night, because we don't really have a lot of spaces in our lives where we have to pay attention for extended periods. And this can be really detrimental because it can be hard to then, kind of do the deep work, such as when we need to study, for example. That's the kind of cognitive work that we need to do that often we've fallen out of the habit of it because everything we're getting is kind of bite-sized. The videos we're watching are getting shorter and shorter. Reels are everywhere. The reason you're seeing reels everywhere and all the different apps is because they are so good at hijacking people's attention. And what happens then is as we kind of watch short things, we become really out of the habit of having the concentration to get through a long thing. A long piece of information. So you might find even, if you're on YouTube, you look at a video that's 17 minutes long and you go, oh my gosh, that's 17 minutes. That's a lifetime. I could never watch that. But that video is 20 seconds. That'll keep my attention. Or TikTok, Snapchat, they all kind of get us into these patterns. And they're very, very much designed that way. So we see short attention spans, and we see difficult focusing on long-term content, such as books and lectures. Yes. So we are 30 minutes into this webinar. I hope that everyone is still able to pay attention on that note. And we see dopamine hijacking. We're going to speak about dopamine in a moment, but essentially what happens is the apps are specifically designed for the addictive feedback loops, which means we kind of I'll get into the dopamine cycle in a moment, but essentially what's happening is they're hijacking our neurology, hijacking the chemicals in the brains to make sure that we are as hooked as we can be. Because ultimately, you just have to look at incentives to understand why things happen. So I forget who it was, Silicon Valley founder. He said, if you show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. So if we understand what incentivizes people, we know what will happen. So the incentives for most social media apps is to have people on them for as long as possible. They're kind of competing in an attention economy. The market is people's attention, and they need to get as many people's attention for as long as possible. So time on app is a metric that they're out to look at. And that then can be used to sell advertising. So that's the incentive, right? We make money by selling advertising. We sell more advertising if more people are on our app for longer. And so the business model then is to kind of set up in a way to make sure that those outcomes are achieved. And they're very good at doing it. That's why we struggle so much. This is what Tristan Harris calls the race to the bottom of the brainstem. The kind of basic primal parts of our brain where we're not making the kind of rational, intellectual, philosophical decisions we're making our prefrontal cortex, but the really kind of basic decisions there, right? Well, that donut looks nice, I'm going to eat that. Um, that I'm going to eat that cake. I can't stop. That's the kind of primal parts of our brain, and these are the parts of our brain that are being hacked through social media as well. Yeah, so that's the challenge that we're up against. So dopamine, I'm sure by now dopamine is having a moment for sure. I think probably because it's so relevant in the way that we interact with the modern world. But I think people are more aware of this neurotransmitter than they have ever been. And that's a good thing because it's really instrumental in the way that we kind of interact with the world and how we motivate ourselves and all of the things that can lead to a life that feels fulfilling or not, a life that feels distracted or present. So I've just thought of it as a pleasure chemical. It's not just that; it's more about motivation. And we can have dopamine hits even when we just anticipate achieving something. So if you think, okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my PhD next year. Just the thought of that can have some type of dopamine reward, and it's really helpful because what dopamine does is it feels good, and because it feels good, we strive to get more of it. And typically in the worlds and environments where our brains evolved, that was fine. You think, well, I should probably get up and go hunting for those berries because, for one, they would taste good, and number two, everyone in the tribe would look up to me, and that's my way of kind of getting a bit of status, and that all of that feels good. So I'm out and I go get some berries, and then everyone kind of cooperates and is happy and fine. That's a low information environment, right? It's just kind of the savannah and a few berries and the odd lion. In our modern world, it's just information everywhere, right? Like everywhere we look, we just overloaded with the stimulus. And so it's possible, in the same way that I speak about boredom earlier, it's possible to kind of go searching out for these dopamine hits, and not only do we search for them, but they search for us. This is what notifications and intrusive technology does. Is it kind of hijacks this thing in our brain that was there to motivate us to go out there and do things in the world. It hijacks us, and we don't have to do anything just to get a little bit of a good feeling. And then that can start to lead to these deficits that we find. So it's about not just getting the rewards, but enjoying it. If dopamine didn't feel good, we might be less likely to go out there and actually get the things we want to get. So what is happening when you get a like or a comment or some type of ping? That red sign on the WhatsApp. I've got a message back from someone who I wanted to hear from. This is just a mini reward that part of your brain gives, and that social media and these very clever and cunning developers have recognized is actually can be activated in this way. Yes, thank you, Anita. It is recorded, and this will be on the employability site as well if you want to have a look at it, if you need access to this webinar afterwards. So it's kind of like a slot machine. So gambling is something that and a lot of behavioral addictions. So these are slightly different, but often similar neurological processes going on to a substance dependence. Substance dependence is something about the substance that's causing us to feel a certain way. A behavioral addiction is about something we're doing that makes us feel a certain way, that we start to become dependent and we start to kind of habitualize it. So gambling is one of these behavioral addictions, and this is why people play slot machines. It's about money, but it's also about the reward, dopamine hits that we're getting in when we kind of get the all of the fruit lined up for whatever it is these days when your sport team wins, because now you can obviously bet on any sport on your phone with very little friction. And the social media model is kind of developed along the lines of the gambling model as well, which is this intermittent reward. So I think this is something Instagram, I don't know if they still do it, but they definitely used to do it. If you get, let's say, 10 likes on your reel that you share, they're not going to give it to you. The fact that I'm saying 10 likes probably gives some insight into my follower count. Some of you might get a lot more than that. But if you get 10 likes, let's say in an hour, they're not going to give all of those to you straight away. They're going to kind of drip feed you because that's what's going to keep you the most engaged. So they'll give you maybe 3 at a time and they'll wait 20 minutes and then they'll kind of, oh, by the way, here's another like. This is really powerful for our brains. Our brains really love that type of that intermittent inconsistency of rewards. And there's evolutionary reasons for this as well. As this kind of kept us focused on the job at hand. We're kind of maybe didn't find anything for a while, and then all of a sudden we would find a buck. And, that's the big reward, right? It's kind of hijacking these really basic survival biological models that we have, systems that we have in our brains. So the unpredictability is really powerful. It increases engagement, and this is then when we get these dopamine spikes. So there's feel-good feelings of what's there. This is what we pick up our phone. It's not that we're doing it out of habit. We're doing it because there was a time where it once felt good. And it might not feel as good anymore to have this relationship with with technology, but there was a time when it did. And this is often what keeps us coming back. And this is a kind of interesting analog as well for unhealthy relationships. It's a bit of a rabbit hole that I sense myself going down, but this is something that happens with unhealthy relationships as well. We often have patterns in unhealthy relationships or even abusive relationships. We wonder, why do I do that? Or why do I keep coming back to that? And the reason is because it felt good at one point. It might not be good right now, but there was, when the habit was formed, felt good back then. And that's a big part of understanding human dependency, and behavior dependencies, such as dependencies on technologies, are the same, right? There was a time when it felt really good to pick up the phone and see that you had a notification. It might now feel that actually you have no control or agency over it. But it still keeps you hooked because there's the feeling of what this felt good before might feel good again. Okay, and then this is the addiction loop that we find ourselves in. So you're feeling bored, you don't like feeling bored, you're not meant to like feeling bored. So you pick up your phone as a way of not feeling bored, and in anticipation, your brain gives you a little bit of a dopamine hit. So you think, well, this might be good, this might be something for me here. That feels a little bit good. That starts to reinforce a behavior. And then you might see something that actually takes the boredom away for a moment. You see that funny video and you laugh and you're amused, and all of a sudden you're entertained. And then your brain is giving you a reward for that because you've done the right thing. And you kind of put your phone down, you start to reward again. You find yourself in this cue craving reward loop. And the problem with that, you might think that that's fine. The problem is our brains are not going to be able to produce the same amount of dopamine. So we start to find ourselves in this need for constant stimulation. And because we're in need for constant stimulation, we start to experience less sensitivity to the things out there in the world that would have been pleasurable otherwise. Maybe just speaking to someone doesn't feel as enjoyable as it did before. And so we can, maybe look to speak to people less and be on our phones more. That's a kind of easier way of getting these feelings. And maybe before studying for half an hour would give you some type of dopamine hit. Now it doesn't really compare to an Instagram reel. So we then more likely to kind of, between the two of them over time, we're going to choose Instagram reel more. And then the things in life that used to give us pleasure, all of a sudden they seem to be less pleasurable, and we start to experience more anxiety and irritability when we're offline. And this is because reduced pleasure is linked to the dopamine deficit, which is we're actually producing less dopamine and we're having less dopamine rewards from the experiences that we would have in our life that before would have felt quite pleasurable. Kind of tragic, isn't it, when you kind of see how we start to lose pleasure in the things in our life, maybe a little bit more, take a bit more work, take a bit more sacrifice, maybe they're a little bit more kind of low information, probably the things in our lives that are going to be quite good for us. We tend to start doing less of them, and we tend to be more anxious and irritable when we are around those things. Okay, I hope this is making sense. I know we're kind of running out of time a bit, and I suspect with quite a few of you here, there'll be a few comments and questions. So I'm going to try wrap us up. So Tristan Harris, I mentioned just now, he's really interested because he kind of knows how the sausage is made, as it were. He used to be employed by Google as a design ethicist. Didn't last particularly long there. You can come to your own conclusions of why he might not have liked a person like him inside the tent. Now he's very much outside the tent and sharing what he knows about these companies. And he has some really interesting insights. And there was a Netflix documentary that he was in a couple of years ago called The Social Dilemma. So you have misspelled it there, but yeah, The Social Dilemma. That's worth checking out if you're interested in the ideas that he has. So his mission is really just to expose how these companies are exploiting the psychological vulnerabilities that we have. So some of the things I was just describing in those dopamine cycles, this tendency to have these old brains, which are kind of now struggling against new algorithms and being hijacked by these really sophisticated devices, to understand how we have, we come built the way we are, and they have learned how to take advantage of that. So he's on a movement to, you can, look this up if you're interested in it. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but really just, how do we go from time well spent to time well lived? Because a lot of the time what we're doing with these technologies, we're not actually living, and we're also not looking back on the time that we have spent and thinking, I'm so glad that I was on TikTok for 4 hours today, or I'm so glad that I've spent combined 3 years of my life, on YouTube. We more likely look back and think that wasn't anything that added much value to my life. But we have to be aware of the design tricks, so the things that are there that are actually trying to hijack us. And in doing so, his mission is helping us reclaim agency over our attention. Okay, so as I mentioned just now, there's this attention economy. Social media is not just neutral. They're trying everything they can to make sure that they get our attention because they want us to be on their platforms. They make money through that. They do not make money by making us happy in the long run. They don't make money by making us into psychologically well-developed people. That's not their profit incentive. So if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. That's a really kind of basic concept when it comes to social media, and you are being sold to all of the advertisers. And in itself is always bad things. Targeted advertising, you might be able to say there are some benefits to that, but obviously there's a lot of kind of misaligned incentives there, that these apps want something and we perhaps want something else, and they are most of the time winning. So yeah, these apps are built to manipulate. These are really intelligent people who are using really sophisticated understanding of human neuropsychology to hijack our attention. This is that, they've evolved over time. The Facebook feed used to stop, used to be able to, it's crazy to think about it now, but you kind of scroll for a while and then you've got other things to look at. They got rid of that, a decade ago more, probably, when they realized, actually, what if we can keep people infinitely scrolling, how good would that be? And it's really worked for them. And then again, the variable rewards, these are the kind of, basic biological impulses that our brains have. And then push notifications are a really powerful thing as well. And if there's one thing you want to do right now, and you have the luxury to do it, and that you don't always need notifications, turn the notifications of your social media off. That's one way of reclaiming some agency there. And reclaiming the agency by saying, okay, when I go on the app, I might go on it more than I want to, but at least I'll go on it when I want to, not when you're telling me I need to go on the app. Because that's what push notifications do. They're like, okay, I think you need to be on now, you come on, and they kind of, we lose our agency through that. And then addiction. So much of this is about behavioral addiction. Okay, so I see a couple of questions that come up. How do we stop it? That seems a really important and reasonable thing to ask, as now that we've had a kind of whirlwind tour of how these devices are working and what they're taking advantage of. And there's some good tips that are coming up in the comments as well that I'm seeing. And you have to find what works for you as well. With anything, we have to kind of find our own personalized ways of dealing with stuff, because what works for me might not work for you. But there's some general principles that we can start to say, well, these are things that sometimes in the past have worked for other people. You might need to tinker with them a bit. So there are boundaries that you set technologically. That means you don't actually have to kind of have the willpower yourself. And that's a good starting point, actually, just to recognize that willpower by itself is probably not enough. If you say, I want to look at my phone less because I don't think it's actually good for me and I'm looking at it too much, that impulse is probably not going to stop you from looking at your phone as much as you are. It might keep you intentional for a day, but over time, the phone will win. So you have to then maybe be a bit more creative about the way you solve the problem and put more friction in the way. And you can use technology to protect yourself from technology as well. There's built-in, app time limits. You can always, get around these or dismantle them. They're not foolproof, but they might just put a bit of friction away that might be helpful. So there's lots of different ways of doing it. Apps are out there that kind of set limits and help you design the technological landscape in a way that you think would be more suitable to you. Delete apps from your phone that you don't use. I see Texera, you're saying that. That's a great piece of advice as well. Think about what you're gaining, what you're losing through the app. If you think that you need it some way for your life, maybe delete it so you only get it when you're on a laptop. That might be, again, a way of kind of putting a bit of distance between yourself and it, resetting some of the relationships. Turn off non-essential notifications. Spoke about that just now. You can think about no phone zones. So phones are very good at creeping into every element of our lives. You might find, you didn't have a phone at the dinner table, and now you have it there every time. You didn't have a phone when you ate, and now you did every time. You might have found it before you used to kind of have an hour before bed where you read. Now your phone does you doom scrolling the last thing before you go to bed. They kind of creep, and they over time kind of encroach on our lives. So we have to be mindful about saying, well, maybe I can then create these zones in my life where I'm not using my phone, and be very kind of strict about it, and mindful about it, because there's technology that you can help with that. There are kind of boxes that you can lock and you can timers on, and they won't let your phone out until a specific time has passed as well. You can buy this too, although they come with a bit of a cost, but they can be quite helpful. And then routines, right? If you are just in your normal routine with your phone is going to win. So if you say, okay, well, again, because we are ritualistic and habitualistic mammals, you can start to create periods in your life. You say, okay, well, when I'm having my first coffee, I don't open my phone. And then you stick to that, and you kind of have to do it for a week, 2 weeks. They say, what, 1 day to break a habit. You have to kind of stick at it for a while. And then over time, if you're intentional, it'll start to become a new habit. You got to be quite motivated about the why to get you through those initial few days. This is the same when you're making any type of dependency. Being mindful about bedtime routine and hygiene there, bedtime hygiene, sleep hygiene. You can think about, if you're being a bit more serious about it, the so-called digital habits. So take a day off perhaps from screens. How does that feel? The idea of taking a whole day off from screens. Think about what that might be like. Think about how hard it might be, but also perhaps how you might find that it's actually serves you. Again, you got to find what works for you. And then think about replacing. Again, this is full advice when it comes to breaking any type of dependency or any type of relationship, any behavior or substance that's not good for us. Is if we just take it out of our lives, then we're often stuck with a gap there, right? And the things that are driving us to use that are still there, and that can be really hard. So replace it with something else. So if you were, lying on the couch scrolling, do something else, right? Learn how to play the guitar, go for a walk, get out of that environment. Try writing music, whatever it is. You don't have to be too idealistic or romantic about it, but something that's going to just maybe shake things up a bit. If you find that you're having too much of your connection online, you're withdrawing too much, look for real life connections. So think about a coffee date, and think about when you're at that coffee date, just leaving your phone in your pocket, or even in the car, or at home. And that's something to explore as well. Research has shown even if your phone is in front of you, it actually disrupts the communication, because everyone knows at any point that the communication can be disrupted. Sends a message as well about how important the person in front of you is. This is something parents struggle with as well, kind of constantly being on their phones around their kids, and then looking back and saying, that doesn't feel great, I wish I hadn't, or this first thing happened and I was looking at my phone. Doesn't make them bad parents, just means, again, the phone always win in these situations unless we're finding ways of smarting it proactively, not in real time. You can't just be trusting yourself to respond in real time, because the phone is going to be better at that than you are. Your advantages of being proactive and kind of planning ahead of time and creating a system and strategies for resisting the pull of the phone. And think about play. Play is something that so few adults actually have in their life, but it's really, really good for them. There's many different ways of getting play. It could be sports, could be dance, going out, just spending time with people who you laugh a lot with. Real world interaction, reclaiming that type of real world interaction. Really good for self-care, emotional wellness as well. So great for that as well. Hobbies, cooking, all of those things. And then find offline joy as well. So I want to finish with this. This is a challenge to a 7-day digital detox. think about if you are open to this, if you have been convinced by some of the ideas in this webinar, or perhaps if you were convinced of them even before you sat down for this webinar. Think about committing perhaps to this detox challenge. So the way it looks, think about one tech-free hour every day, and then maybe 1 day free of social media every day, and then think about one free activity per day. So it's not a huge amount, but it starts to put a wedge in the habit again, and starts to open up spaces in your life where the technology is uninvited. And then you can use as a foundation for what comes next. You can think about, well, what does my work and my studies and my life, what does that mean? How I need to use my technology, and then I can start to start from there. It's not necessarily the answer to say, well, I don't want to have a phone, or maybe I don't have a burner phone. Yeah, that's a way you can think about it. What do I need in my life? What's practical? I need to stay in touch with family that's far away. I need to stay in touch with kids. I need to work academically. Okay, those are what I need. How do I then design my life appropriately? Okay, so that's it, guys. Thank you very much. I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to rush into some questions. I'm seeing your comments as they come through as well. I know sometimes when I speak about this type of thing, people ask about kids. I think the golden rule for children right now is as little phone time as possible. But if you stories are great still. So if kids have kind of controlled screen time where they're watching age appropriate stories, that's good for them. Hopefully we get that type of thing. And that's not bad necessarily. Any type of algorithms you should keep children away for as long as possible. Smartphones children don't need. So the golden rule is kind of if your child needs a phone, and again, you've got to kind of balance it to what your life looks like. But typically the golden rule at this point is burner phone at 13, smartphone at 16, no social media before 16. And governments and schools are starting to catch up to this and actually ban it to those kind of ages as well. Guys, thank you very much. So nice to see so many comments and people in the chat. I really enjoyed reading them as I went. If at times I sounded a bit distracted, that's because I was just reading what was coming through. Yeah, good. Any questions? Thank you for your comments. Timber, you're raising your hand. You want to say something? Hello. I've allowed you to talk if you want to. Sometimes people raise their hands accidentally.
Hi, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
I know I just wanted to find out as to how does one get a hold of the recording if you want a recording.
Yes, thank you. A lot of people are asking. So the recording will be on the Regent Employability site. Normally it takes a week or so to maybe to be up a bit before then. But if you have a look at the Regent Employability site, it'll be up on there.
On the employee site.
Employability. So there's a Regent Employability site. I'm not sure exactly what the address is. You'll be able to find. I think Google is able to find it. If you can't, drop me an email. I'm going to pop email in the chat as well again.
Thank you.
I'll put it in the chat again. So if you want to email me with regarding that or anything else, feel free to drop me a mail.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Great, thank you. Yes, okay, great, good comments. Len, will South Africa be next to ban social media ban 6? I don't know next, but I'm pretty sure it's coming. I think this is just becoming a no-brainer. I know Australia's already ahead of it. A lot of New York's American states, including New York, have banned it. So I think people are waking up to this. Sibonga, what do we do with the overwhelming growth in industrial technology that threatens the jobs of many people? So that's a great question, but that's a kind of systemic question, right? It's hard for a single, for one of us to address that. That's something that's going to that's a whole societal movement, technological movement that's happening. It's pretty scary. We can do, I guess, is I don't think AI is taking our jobs necessarily as quickly as it seems, depending on what our jobs are, but certainly things are changing. If we can use AI as a tool and become comfortable and accustomed to it, that might be something that can keeps us a little bit future-proofed. The idea normally is to try and keep on learning and shifting. But yeah, these are kind of big systemic issues to deal with. Yes, thank you. So many good positive comments. Really appreciate all of them. It's great to have you all with us. And we will pick it up again in beginning of March. I think the first Thursday of every March, of every month at 2. But we'll send out invites again. I really hope we'll see all of you there again. And we'll carry on with the series, speaking about different types of psychological aspects that can contribute to wellness and well-being, and also making us efficient and effective actors in the world, in our relationships, in our professional lives, in our academic environments as well. So that's what we're going to continue working on. Once again, thank you to everybody. And yeah, we'll catch up again in a month's time. Bye bye.